Good morning, members and friends of Calvary. It's time for your video devotion of the week. Today it comes from one of the most famous portions of Scripture in the Old Testament in relationship to Jesus Christ, and that is Isaiah chapter 7 and verse number 14. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So we know the text, we know the verse, and it's one of many references in the Old Testament to the coming of Christ and the birth of Christ and what we celebrate at Christmas. Just got to thinking a little about the Old Testament prophecies about Christ, and was doing a little research. The accepted number is there are 300 Old Testament passages that directly relate to the coming of Jesus Christ. Alfred Edersheim, who we use quite a bit in our study, actually found 456 direct references in the Old Testament to the person of Jesus Christ. This is not counting the other means beyond just direct references like we just read. For example, the law pointed out Jesus Christ in the giving of the lamb for the atonement of sin. That was a picture and a allusion to the Jesus Christ that was to come. The tabernacle, every instrument within the tabernacle was in some way, shape, or form a type or a picture of the person of Jesus Christ. The same with the temple, the instruments of the temple going into the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, all of those things were pictures of the coming Christ. Then there are people in the Old Testament that are types of Christ. And for example, Joseph is a type of Christ and rejected by his brothers and went down into Egypt and yet saved the world. Again, a type of Christ. And so in the Old Testament, there would be thousands upon thousands of references to the coming of Jesus Christ. And here was my thought this morning. God knew with every reference about Christ and to Christ in the Old Testament that the purpose for Christ's coming was to die. We live in a very emotionally driven society and everybody gets hurt and offended so easy. God had to have been hurt. God had to have been weighted down by every reference to Jesus, by every acknowledgement that he was coming, going to leave his presence, going to be rejected by men, going to be punished, going to be beaten, going to be tortured, and then eventually die. God knew that with every reference to his son that he put in the Old Testament. And yet he did it anyhow, because it was for our good. And so the challenge this morning is this. There are sometimes we have to do things that hurt. There are sometimes we have to, quote unquote, suck it up to help other people, to be a blessing to other people. I'm grateful that Jesus Christ came. I am grateful that God placed all of these references to the coming of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. Every one of them a reminder to him of that which was going to happen to his son. And yet he did it anyhow, because he loved you and he loved me. Sometimes to help people, it's going to hurt. We ought to be willing to do that, just like God was willing to do for us, knowing his son was going to suffer and die. I'm thankful that he did. I hope that'll be a blessing to you this morning. Merry Christmas.